Guys, I just got back from the shop and something I saw there made me realise that not only is the UK in a very bad way, as I'm sure we all know, but we can actually do something about it. Now, the thing we can do about it is a good thing, but there's also something very bad that we can do, and I think both of them will have positive results. Just hear me out. Stay with me, hear me out, all right? Look, I've written some things down on a tablet here because there's a quote that I want to read to you now. It's about standards. I was a standards officer in the Royal Air Force for, well, about a decade, really, and I did 20 years. And I was responsible for the flying training standards on the largest squadron in Northern Europe, which was a squadron flying fast jets. Now, my responsibility was to make sure that we upheld standards. It's very easy to lower standards. And once you do that, very hard to get them back again. When I went to the shop, there was litter all around the car park. And as I walked to the shop, I picked it up. There was more than normal. Like people are throwing stuff out their car. I picked it up. And there was a young guy coming out of the shop. And he said, "What are you doing?" As I'm picking litter up. And I said, "I'm picking the litter up." He goes, "Why are you doing that?" I said, "Because I'm keeping our car park clean, mate. I'm keeping our shop clean." And he went, "Oh, well, yeah, fair one, actually, yeah." So obviously to him, it was a bit of an abnormality that someone should do that. But of course, we know that us as British people, English, Scottish, Welsh and Northern Ireland need to do it. I'm going to hit you with a quote right now. This quote comes from Lieutenant General David Morrison, former Chief of the Australian Army. It's important because there's been an issue with the Royal Marines. The quote is, "The standard you walk past is the standard you accept." If I'd walk past that litter to go into the shop, then I'd be accepting living in a littery place. You can see a lot of these towns, Bradford, Leeds, Birmingham, parts of London, where there's a lot of litter. Why? Because a lot of people living there, they're not English, are they? They have no heritage here, no ancestry. They don't care. They accept the lower standard because they are lower standard people for accepting what's around them. You know what I mean? We understand that. They don't have the same standards as, say, an Englishman who may tidy up after himself. You know, that's the thing. And I'm going to talk to you about a tweet that came in about the Royal Marines. And it's quite important, this one, because we're in danger of lowering the standards in the Royal Marines. In fact, there's non-commissioned officers in the Royal Marines that are really upset with this, and I think it's important we talk about it. A lady called Caroline, a journalist, said, "I was approached for help with an issue in the Royal Marines this week. Female recruits can't complete the evacuation test where they have to carry a fellow Marine on their back for 200 metres. But pressure is being put on these non-commissioned officers, the instructors, to pass them anyway because of DEI." I've been in environments before where people have looked to lower the standards. It's been very uncomfortable. We've had to make sure that if we are doing that, it's for a reason. Now, we never lowered the standards for women in flying fast jets because women, they die in exactly the same way as men. And you don't want to lower the standards because a lot of the time I'm flying with a woman in the jet, and if I accept the lower standard from her, well, I might be signing my own death warrant, okay, because she'll fly me into the ground, and vice versa. That's where the trust comes from. So we uphold people, and that's what standards do. Standards office is supposed to do that. We don't seem to have a standards office in the UK. There's no one really looking out for it. I should do that job, shouldn't I? I'd be brutal. You would just be so upset with me. Right. Now, a reply to that tweet was from someone called John. "The test was originally designed for men only. It needs to be adapted." And in my mind, that is everything wrong with the British public today, that we need to accept the change. Now, I'm a conservative, but very small c, and I don't believe in this modern conservative party under Kemi Badenoch whatsoever. Traitorous party. So I just believe in conserving values, traditional positive values. I think we all should do that, but I'm not averse to change or development, and I think that's important as well. That's what progressivism is. The thing about it is, though, if we change this test for the Royal Marines and we allow women to have lower standards, and that has happened in the British Army, by the way, then we are lowering the standards of that, ultimately a very effective fighting force. Now, the Royal Marines were formed in 1664. They were actually originally called the Duke of York and Albany's Regiment of Foot. They were actually part of the British Army. It was called the Army at the time. Until 1755, when they became part of the Navy. They were the sea soldiers of the Army, then they became the sea soldiers of the Navy. I know that because my father was a Royal Marine. And I was a naval officer before I was a Royal Air Force officer. So, you know, a bit of history there, I guess. Very proud service. Very, very proud. You think about 1664, the Royal Air Force is only 100 years old. And these guys are over, 300 years old? And a bit. I can't even do the maths. Do you do the maths for me? It's a lot, all right? So, you want to start changing that to allow women to come in. You're going to lower the standards for every Marine. That wasn't the only comment, though. There were a lot of comments. Now, the actual evacuation test is quite physically demanding. I've got it written here. It simulates the evacuation of a wounded comrade from the battlefield. So it has to be done with a Royal Marine versus a Royal Marine of an equal kind of size, you know. However, the recruit must lift and carry a similarly weighted Marine over a set distance, usually about 200 metres. The weight requirement, the Marine wears full kit, and the person they carry is normally about 80 to 100 kilograms, all right, which is about 175 to 220 pounds in American language. It's got a time limit on it, and it's got to be over varied terrain. It's part of the Royal Marines Commando training test at the end, the 40 mile and everything else. Now, or 30 miler? 30 miler. Now, only one woman has passed this. So she did the all arms course, which was 9 weeks long. I think women have passed that one. I don't think women have passed this full test down at Lympstone, so they just haven't passed it. Many women struggle to do this, apparently, and at the moment, the Royal Marines have not lowered the standards for this test, and bloody right to them as well. So as I said, it's one of the hardest ones. The British Army do half that distance, 50 metres, with about 80 kilograms. Paratroop speed company do a 10-mile speed march attack it on the end. US Marine Corps, they do have women in that, of course. It's a fireman's carry for 65 metres with about 85 kilograms, so the lower level in 2 minutes. But there's a female adaptation for this. Women struggled, but they get extra training, and then women put them through this, and they do this. Now, US Ranger School is hard. SEALs is hard. Australian Defence Force is hard. The British Army, they've adapted it a little bit for women. Yeah, absolutely. So you can see the problem. We're lowering standards. It's like, if we do this, then we can let less of a Marine in. We can let less of a man in. Because people go, well, it's not fair on the women that's failing. Yeah, but men fail it as well. This is what people don't understand. It's not fair because women can't be Marines. Yes, but there's a lot of men that can't be Marines. It wasn't just women that I failed when I was a fighter pilot flying instructor. I failed more men, overwhelmingly more men. Like, hardly any women. If you're a woman coming through fast jet training, you're probably going to pass. If you're a man coming through fast jet training, well, from the very beginning, you're probably going to fail. That's just the truth. It just is. There are far fewer women coming through than there were men. And we could talk about that at length if you want to. So we're talking about standards still, aren't we? Now, looking at this, I had a guy write to me as well, because one of my views is that we shouldn't let anyone in the Muslim community become part of the British government, because I believe that will lower the standards. The reason I believe it lowers the standards is because Muslims tend to group together with other Muslims. Integration has not worked. It's segregation. We understand that. They live in Bradford, Leeds, Birmingham, wherever. You name some cities for me. Hit the comments, guys. And they tend to group up. And that's because we've tried to integrate them too quickly, because we brought in 905,000 people in 2023, etc., whereas it should have been 10 or 20 to allow integration to happen. It hasn't happened. And it's not just the Muslim community. It's other communities as well. However, we don't see other communities, and Muslims at 7% of the country here. We don't see other communities trying to lean in and elevate their own community in the way that Muslims do. So I say, if you allow one Muslim into the British government, then you have to allow 100. In the same way, if you allow 1% of the British government to be Muslims, you have to accept the fact that that could be a government with 100% Muslims in it. And you have to ask yourself, do you want that in this Christian land? And it is a Christian land, whether you like it or not. Our laws and our values are Christian. The king is the head of the Church of England, of course. I'm not saying you have to go to church. I'm just saying that the values, the laws, the things that you uphold, forgiveness, tolerance, acceptance, charity, there's a lot of things. These are Christian values. These are not, well, they may be Islamic values, but they're not. This is a Christian country. I don't see Christians in any government, in any Islamic country at all. It just doesn't happen. All right. So why are we allowing that here? I see it as lowering the standard. I do. I'm not going to back down from that. So a guy wrote to me about that, and he said, look, he goes, at the moment, and he's right, legal straitjackets would prevent any kind of discrimination in that direction. This is a guy that I speak to loads of people on the internet, guys. You want to write to me, Facebook, Twitter, fastjetperformance.com, use my email if you want. I don't mind. You'll find it on the website. You're only allowed certain kinds of racism these days. I'm afraid we just seem to be running out of time. And this man is very interesting, and he's very right. And that's what I talked to you about, the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do. And both are going to have a tolerable result for us as real British people, real English people with ancestry in this country. I do sympathise with your pride in being English in the English way of life, he's saying to me. My fear is that we are living through an historical national shift that happens to all countries continually. We just happen to be living on the cusp of that change, and it's hard to swallow, and I think he's right. There's a reason why so many are leaving the UK. You know what I've said about that before. There is a growing feeling that the battle is lost. I think that they might be right. My contemporaries often say that if they could leave, they would. About a century ago, we were the largest empire the world has ever known. Today, we just seem pathetic by comparison. He's right, because in 2025, 25% of the world was under British rule and spoke English. That's the truth. That's why when people argue with me, I say, what language are you arguing in, mate? You're arguing in English, aren't you? And he goes on here to say, if the higher rate taxpayers leave, I said this, then obviously pensions don't get paid. Does that make the government notice? And what he wrote back, because it's a complex argument, he wrote, in 2023, 4,200 millionaires left the UK. In 2024, almost 11,000 left the UK. So it might be even more this year. And who's paying these taxes? It's these higher rate tax earners. And when he says a million, it's not like the guy's got a salary of £1 million a year. It's that his net wealth is $1 million. You may have a house that's worth, say, 500,000. You may have cars. You may have income. You know what I mean? These people are leaving. People, arguably, like you and me, we're not huge, high net worth individuals. But remember, I think it's something ridiculous. Like, I can't even remember what the figure is. Something like the top 20% of the population are paying 60% or something like that. It's well overweighted. You know what I mean? So, here we go. 75% of 18 to 34-year-olds are considering leaving in the next 5 years. 10% of 18 to 24-year-olds are considered leaving imminently. Even if they don't end up leaving, it shows great discontent in the country, both ends of the spectrum. So I'll leave, what's that, 11 minutes? I'll leave you this now. And what I'm going to say is I'm just going to repeat that quote to you. The standard you walk past is the standard you accept. See, what I think we should be doing is saying to the government, yeah, I understand what you're trying to do. It's manage decline. Oh, I didn't read the Simon Heffer bit, did I? The Simon Heffer bit was fantastic. He wrote an article today. He's in Australia. And the article he wrote, I'll just read this bit to you really quickly right now. It's fascinating because he wrote, look, in Australia, they realise what's happening here. In Australia, they can see it. They can see what's happening to the UK in Australia. And he wrote, so Simon Heffer asked the Labour MP last summer what would happen after the inevitable Labour election victory. And this MP said to him, he said, 5 years of managed decline, he answered. He said they had no money for anything else. But it is increasingly obvious to the world, as it must be to us, that this isn't managed decline. It's unmanaged decline. Our appearance as a flailing, once great nation is the fruit of stupidity, incompetence, ideological prejudice, and atrocious judgment. I've said this for years. Heffer finishes up by noting the serial derelictions that have reduced us to an object of pity among our friends around the world. Incredible. That's the view from Australia. Britain is in a worse shape than we think. We must relentlessly protest the serial derelictions that have reduced us to an object of pity. And how do we do that? We can't, because the government's not listening. So that's what I mean. Either we do something about it, we all leave, which I'm not for, or we rip the whole thing down ourselves. I'm not advocating or inciting violence. I'm just saying that at these Palestinian marches, for example, we stand there with an English flag and we show the government who the people are. It's a difficult one, isn't it? And we're still working on the answer. You know what I think, guys? I think it's about you. I've always said this. I think it's about the individual. I think it's about fitness, family, finance, fuel, all those good things. I think we really need to start looking after your areas, picking up litter, everything else. You know what I mean? Hit the comments with what you think. I think we need to make sure we uphold our own personal standards, and from that, the country will grow. We may still be in trouble, but we'll go down like Englishmen. It's up to you. I know which one I'm going to choose. Appreciate you listening, guys. Hey, have a great Sunday. All right, talk soon. Tim Davies, Fast Performance.